Dear church, let's talk about identity crisis. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited about my guest today. My friend Terry Nolan is here. Terry is a member at the Oldham Lane Church of Christ and also has a very interesting job. And I wanted you to come on and talk about it, and then also talk about some things that you have noticed in your job that have led to our discussion today. But first, I want you to go into as much detail as you can, but tell us a little bit about what you do.
So what I do is I work for a national organization that provides literacy solutions for schools and districts across our country.
Okay.
And I have the privilege of knowing what's happening in education, being on those front lines, being at the forefront, not only at the front lines, but like in the know about what's coming down and what is happening.
The trends and all that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The trends that are happening across the country. I get to see that firsthand, especially as it pertains to literacy. Okay. And this is something that's education-based, not necessarily religious-based. We have a literacy crisis in our country.
Okay.
65% of our kids in classrooms today cannot read at proficiency levels.
Yeah, what do you think? Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, that is because just like in religious circles, there's this trend that seems to be happening. There are trends that happen in education, and we have not resourced, taught, and equipped our educators to know how to teach reading. Okay. And here's what's another interesting fact is 65% of our kids can't read at grade level, at proficiency levels. Mm-hmm. When you talk about students of color, it goes up to 81%.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, now let's...
So not trending in a good direction.
No, not trending in a good direction. The good news is we do know what to do about it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the great news.
Okay.
But now we have to educate our teachers, our administrators on what to do.
Well, you were telling me that your job is like you get to sit at the table with the biggest names in education, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember how you described it. You said, think of being able to sit at the table with the Beatles and Elvis, if you're a music producer or something like that. That's kind of your job. You're sitting with the higher ups in education to discuss this. So
absolutely.
You've got a pretty good audience there, or they've got a pretty good audience, however you want to look at it. So what are some of the things that you're discussing when it comes to the solution to the problem?
Yeah. So the solution, like I said, is educating our teachers, educating our administrators. Some are so resistant in education, as in everything. It also comes down to money. Okay. And resources and time and, things like that. And here's where it concerns me as a Christian. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things. Okay. First of all, 65% of our kids can't read at grade level. Mm-hmm. How many of you think are reading the Bible?
Right.
Yeah. They're not.
They're not. Yeah.
They're not. They are getting their Christian values, or should I say, they're getting their values, not Christian values. Yeah. They're getting their values from what the world is telling them to look at, to see. Mainly
social media. Mm-hmm. Things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's shaping their core, that's shaping their values. And you've talked about your concern as a Christian, but also in your job, how there's some overlap there now, and it's caused a bit of a juxtaposition with you, and you're trying to maneuver through that. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The things that I am seeing in education today is that the identity crisis that we are talking about is that we are pushing this agenda that says, kids, your identity should be wrapped up in your sexuality. Yeah. We need, first and foremost, that's where your identity should lie, is in your sexuality, in your race. And I'm not denying someone of their race, not at all. Yeah. But it's when we are putting those things before Christ. I mean, it's a me culture. It's definitely not a he culture.
Yeah, because what we've talked about before is, and even on this podcast with Blake, we've approached this topic a little bit, and we talked about how race, ethnicity, sexuality, all of those things are pieces of who you are. But our culture is trying to tell us that like sexuality is the most important thing and the number one thing that you need to focus on. And you're actually seeing that in the education system.
Yeah, that there are curriculums being written. And here's the thing, the content is getting more descriptive, and if I can use the word worse, for lower and lower and lower ages.
Okay.
So this identity of who you are sexually, sexual and graphic content is being put in front of our children at a younger and younger age, as young as pre-K.
Oh,
Pre-K,
wow.
4 and 5 year olds this is what's being put in front of them.
Definitely an agenda then.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
The agenda is not a Christian one, obviously.
No.
The agenda is trying to shape and mold your values and your identity through the pushing of, could we call it propaganda?
I would say so, because, and here's the unfortunate part, because my daughter's an educator.
Yeah.
And she will tell you, she had a new curriculum laid in her hands last week.
Right.
And, it doesn't fall, and it's all about reading. And I said, oh, no, don't use that one. And she said, but my administrator is telling me to.
Yeah.
And what do I do?
Right.
I said, I get it. Your administrator is telling you to. And educators are having this laid in their hands. And they're getting pressure to say, this is what the state has mandated. This is what our district has mandated. You will teach it. And so there is this persecution that's happening there.
You don't have to go into graphic detail, but what are some of the examples of some of the curriculum that's being put out there that you're talking about?
So there are states in our country that have a 6th through 12th grade, an LGBTQ curriculum that is to be taught for all those 6th through 12th graders.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's that identity. And even saying, well, Chris, you think you like girls, but no, let's test this out and see if you might like boys.
So maybe even trying to persuade to think another way and maybe even project a little bit kind of where they want you to kind of end up.
Yeah.
Perhaps. You were mentioning in this discussion that we were having not long ago, and what really prompted me to have you on the podcast, you were mentioning some of these books that are being placed before the very young children, like you said, as young as pre-K. Talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, there is, and here's where it gets muddy, is a lot of books that are out there today. We know the banned book list, and there is a huge look at this right now in our country.
Right.
And in fact, in Tennessee, on a couple of weeks ago on National Holocaust Remembrance Day, Tennessee said we are going to ban the book Maus, M-A-U-S. It's it is a book about the Holocaust. And so everybody's up in arms that, oh my goodness, we can't teach the Holocaust. But if you get into that book, you will see that there's nudity, sexual content, and that's what's being, and it's a graphic novel. So basically it's a comic book style novel.
Right.
That appeals to kids.
Right.
That appeals to kids. It's not that trying to do away and say that the Holocaust didn't happen. That was a terrible part of our history that should be taught.
Right.
But when it has the nudity, the graphic and sexual content in it, not saying those things didn't happen.
Right.
But
not appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I even think about, I've taught kids in Bible class. You kind of have to pick your words about some
you do. Some of those stories are pretty graphic.
Some of David and Goliath. It's a wonderful story.
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. I mean, David and Bathsheba. At what point do you introduce that to your kids? You've got to understand the tenderness of our kids. And I do a lot of work too in understanding the development of the brain when it comes to the science of reading.
Right.
And children's brains aren't developed to handle that content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you were even talking about it at like kindergarten, I think it was, or maybe even around that age, books about boys relationships with boys kissing boys and things of that nature, and just going that far with it and trying to push that agenda too.
Yeah.
And that's concerning, obviously.
Yes.
You know, so, I mean, what is your role in all this? What are you trying to do to, I don't know if the right word is stop it, but I mean, what is it that you're trying to do to bring a different voice?
Yeah. And that's where it's tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough. I mean, I've even thought to myself, you know, where can I endure? Can I continue to endure?
Right.
And I am in a position now, I do have influence. And so I want to be able right now to continue to use that influence. And the role should be put into the hands of families.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the role in helping our kids, I'm not going to stop this content.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to stop it.
Yeah.
Even an entire collective group of people are not going to stop the content.
Right.
What we can do is continue to be that voice, continue to be that light, and it's in our families, in our homes, and in our churches.
I would guess that you're way in the minority when you meet with other educators or other people higher ups in education.
Yeah.
I would guess that you're maybe even the only one in the room that thinks differently. Is that true?
Many times.
Yeah.
Many times.
That's got to be tough.
It's got to be tough.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I do face a Goliath every day. And it gets hard.
Yeah.
It gets exhausting.
Yeah.
But for me, that's where identity comes into play, because I know my identity.
Right.
I know
That's
my
settled.
identity.
Yeah.
It's there, and I know where I get my strength from. And that's why I can sit in those rooms.
And so they're giving you a place at the table.
Yep.
Which is something.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they hadn't booted you out yet. They hadn't
Not yet.
ousted you yet. I can imagine some of those conversations can be pretty volatile, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I am going to tell you, when we sit around those tables, I go in with a mindset of I value every person in the room.
Sure.
I value every person in the room, because I also know that if I'm going to lead anybody to Christ, I got to love you first.
Right.
I got to value you first. This isn't about me being a hater. It's about me wanting to help others, bring them to Christ.
Yeah. Do you think they catch that? Do you think that some of your cohorts understand that, or is there a lot of animosity? Is it, or have you been able to keep a good relationship with?
Absolutely.
With folks? That's
good. Yeah. I've been able to keep good relationships, and I will say, sometimes I sit home at night and say, I didn't stand up for Jesus today.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, there's been many times when I've left those conversations and say to myself, I did not stand up for Jesus.
Yeah. I know you and I have had that conversation about, you know, where do I draw the line? You know, I have a good job that I love. And I'm sure there's people that are listening to the podcast thinking the same thing, is I have a good job. I love it. I'm passionate about it, but I'm wondering, can I glorify God in the best way in this job, and should I leave it? And you've asked those questions.
Yeah.
And I think in our discussions, you know, some of the things we've talked about is you are getting a place at the table. You may be the only light in that room. You know, take advantage of that, which is what you're doing. But it's got to be exhausting. It's got to be tiring at times.
It is tiring. And then there's light.
But if not you, who, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If not me, who? And then there are moments of, you know, the small victories. And I'll just take the state of Texas.
Yeah.
You know, probably a good portion of the audience is here in the state of Texas.
Yes.
And this is not news to anyone if they follow education.
Right.
Governor Abbott put out a memorandum to our TEA Commissioner, Mike Morath, that said, you know what? Sexual graphic content needs to be removed from curriculums. There is a big, big push right now in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And I see that as a
win.
A win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've got parent groups that are standing up and saying, I don't want this level of content for my kids. And sometimes it's in the most unassuming ways. Like it could be a novel about a true story that happened that's relevant to our history, But then when it infuses such
it's
graphic,
it's a guise to put other things in there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and where I've always landed on that, I was in public school education, now serve on the school board at Wiley ISD, and I've always, maybe I'm thinking of this too simplistically, and you can tell me if I am, but to me, I don't believe that's public education's job to teach my kids those things, to inundate them with that kind of information. I mean, what happened to that, where it's the parents' responsibility? You brought that up a while ago. I mean, I think that's the biggest consideration is, I mean, it's public education. We should have a bigger say in that than anyone as what's taught to our kids. And maybe that's it. Maybe not every state is the same. And maybe there's, states where predominantly that's what they do want, but it's bothersome. And I guess my next question would be, how much of this is, well, just a bunch of hysterical Christians going nuts over something and maybe overplaying their hand? Or is this like major? Like, do we have a right to be up in arms and concerned going forward?
We have a right.
Yeah.
We have a right. There is an absolute urgency. My kids are out of school.
Yeah.
And luckily, we live out here in West Texas where many people believe the same. But it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. Yeah. And I cannot stress that enough. The urgency to make sure that we, like I said, we're not stopping the content.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to resource our kids to be able to discern the content, to be able to see that their identity should not be wrapped up in what they are seeing and what is being pushed to them on social media. Their identity has to be in Christ.
Do you think that more and more people will vote with their feet and take our kids out of public school, do more homeschooling, more private school? Do you think that this might spell maybe not the end, but definitely a trend down for public education, to where they may have to turn around and say, okay, that didn't work. We hear you. We'll go back to at least getting towards center. Do you think that's coming, or do you think it's...
Well, here's what's interesting is the pandemic has caused a lot of that.
That's true.
The pandemic actually has pushed so many, in big cities. And in fact, there was a report out of LAUSD, California, Los Angeles, that, they're down 100,000 students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're talking major numbers now, but that wasn't because it was Christians standing up and taking their kids out.
Right.
There was so many other factors at play, but education itself is in a very pivotal time where we're asking more of our educators.
Yeah.
And that, going back to that comment you made about the responsibility of public education. Public education is assuming more responsibility for what should be happening in the home.
Absolutely.
And
I agree with that. And I see that on the school board. Do you think that as this plays out, that they feel the hit, that they decide maybe this isn't the best path, and maybe there's a change in direction at some point? You said we can't stop it, but I think if West Texas is a bit of an anomaly, like you said, we're kind of in a bubble out here. But I think depending where I live in the country, and if I'm raising kids, I think I'm seriously considering, private school, homeschool. Of course, there's affordability issues there, time issues, and things like that. Sometimes it's your only option.
Yeah.
So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place sometimes.
It is.
But like you said, assuming control as the parents, not accusing anyone of not doing that. I'm just saying as parents, that is our job, and that's what we should be doing, is getting out in front of this, right?
Right.
And making sure that we are teaching where your identity is wrapped up,
Well, and I still go back to my first statement at the beginning, is it all comes back to this reading thing. Our kids can't read. How are they consuming information? Right. They're consuming it through all of those social media channels, through the school content, through all of that. And first of all, we got to teach our kids to read.
Yeah.
And not only read, but read deeply. Mm-hmm. Read deeply to understand and to be able to decipher this book.
Yes.
And want to read the mm-hmm. Bible.
Right.
And then understand where their identity comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I am hit across the face with this novel or this curriculum or this social media meme that says, don't worry, God just wants you to be happy.
Yeah.
I can discern and say, no.
Right.
But we're not resourcing and equipping our kids in that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. And not teaching that there's a standard.
Right.
There's a bottom line here. And all too often we get our standard from just anything and everything, whatever society, subjective standard of the day is, whatever the flavor of the month is. But there is an objective standard, a truth that comes from God. He is the source, and teaching that as your go-to. When my kids went off to college, I told them, you've only really listened to one preacher your whole life. Basically, only had one youth minister. You're going to go, and they went to a Christian college. You're going to go to a Christian college, and your world's going to be opened up, and you're going to see things and hear things you never heard before. You get to go to a different church and all that. And I think it's great. I think it's great that you're going to be expanded in your knowledge, and you're going to hear things and see things that you've never seen before. Just know where the compass points, mm-hmm. know where your North Star is, which, of course, is Scripture.
Yeah.
And I think that is the key, is getting back to the standard. I meant to ask you this a while ago. Do you see a trend with teachers getting fed up and not going into education?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
absolutely.
You think that might lead to a shortage of teachers?
Once again, this is pandemic related, but a shortage of teachers, but also the pressures and demands put on teachers, and not enough time, not enough resources, not enough, right? Yeah. That's absolutely where teachers are right now. But there are teachers that are saying around these curriculums, around this content, that I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. There are other options out there. And, we'll see where we are. But I also say there are so many mm-hmm. that don't have the North Star, that don't have the compass, that'll be like, okay, just whatever, that culture. One of the big things too is diversity. And let me tell you what, I am the first person to welcome diversity.
Yes.
Welcome diversity. Absolutely.
Yes.
But diverse in our cultures, diverse in our skin tone, all of those things. Mm-hmm. But let's not confuse that type of diversity with the unity mm-hmm. that Christ talks about.
Exactly.
When it comes to what is sin, what
morals,
is not,
values.
Morals, values, all of those things.
Absolutely.
And we're confusing those things.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're looking for our identity in something that's not that.
Yeah.
And that's what that's where it all boils down to. And you just made a good point and I was thinking that as you were discussing it, that so many in our country, there is no compass. They're not worried about that. That's not a concern from the top educators that are making the decisions, all the way down to the classroom teachers, to the parents of those kids. I mean, that's a losing battle, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems like. But even within those states and those settings, there's got to be kids that are being raised in homes that are Christian, and our Associate Minister Blake always talks about, we want to fight. That's our natural response. And believe me, I think that Christians need to be involved in the political process, and whether they're running for office or voting or whatever. But I also agree with Blake in that he says, it may be that we just need to hunker down, mm-hmm. And you've said it, he said it, but we start with our home. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where this all starts, not in the classroom. It starts at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, it has to start at home to resource and equip your kids, mm-hmm. because I will never as a parent be able to protect you from this person's beliefs, that person's beliefs.
Right.
You've got to be able to discern for yourself when these things hit you.
Yeah.
Yeah. For our Shine Camp this year.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about this.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your
Shameless
identity.
plug.
Shameless plug. I got to do a shameless plug.
Yeah, for those of you who are listening, we have a camp at Oldham Lane. We have preacher training camp, one of my favorite weeks of the year. We train young men in preaching and leadership. And then we have a girls' camp called Shine that you have been an integral part of and done great things with. And so y'all are going to be talking about this very thing at Shine Camp. So that's coming up in July. So we'll send out information. Anybody wants information about Shine, let us know. And we'll certainly get it out there because it's a great camp at Oldham Lane here in Abilene, Texas. We'd love your girls to come to. That's going to be a major topic.
It's going to be a major topic. Our theme is Yes, I Am. The song, I'm a child of God.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
I like it.
So that's our theme, and we're going to be talking about your identity in Christ.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, because Scripture I brought my list here. Scripture tells me I'm a prisoner of Christ, a bondslave, an ambassador, child, a disciple, a sheep, a soldier, I'm a vessel, an heir.
Yep.
I mean, that's my identity,
Absolutely.
And that's what we need to make sure our kids understand.
And I think that's great. Reiterating it at home, when they leave their home and they come to church, it's complemented there, everything that they've been taught, and then hopefully equipping them so that when they go out into the world, because like you said, you can't wear enough armor to protect you from all the things that are going to be thrown at you. But you can be educated and well-read and able to withstand these things because you have a compass, you have a direction that you're trending. Yeah. I like that. I think, and I like that you said that because I do think our natural tendency is always, well, we're going to get out there and we're going to fight and we're going to protest and all that. And like you said, I don't think we're going to stop this necessarily, but we can react well. Yeah. And we can do what we can fix what we can fix, I guess, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I spent the weekend with my parents, and as we're getting ready for church on Sunday, my mom's had already gotten ready and she's sitting there. And so she's reading from the Bible to me and my daughter as we're getting ready. Right. And she's reminding me or telling me, I guess I never really knew this, but she's reading from Nehemiah about when they're rebuilding the walls and the individuals rebuilding the walls, that they had a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. Yeah. And I thought to myself, my goodness, isn't that the way that we should be today? Yeah. I have a tool in one hand. I'm working. I am out there working hard for the Lord, but I need a weapon.
Need my sword.
I need my sword because that devil, like you said, I can't wear enough armor. Right. I have to be prepared. And I was thankful that she read that yesterday. I'm like, I'm using that. Perfect timing.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then Nehemiah so often fought the battle on his knees.
Exactly.
He prayed before he reacted. And I think that's a key piece in all this too. Yeah. Is continually praying for our children, praying for our educators, praying for those that are out there fighting the battle and striving to, like you said, not being a sorehead, someone who is trying to be difficult to get along with and just spitting venom and all those kind of things, vitriol and all that. Someone who is a Christian who acts like it when you're in the room with those folks, but stands convicted. I think conviction and compassion is where we land on anything, probably, grace and truth. And that's what you're doing. And I think that's what we all should do is, yes, we stand convicted, but we do so with compassion so that others can see Christ living in us. Yeah. And that's a fine balance. It's a tough balance sometimes because I know there's got to be times when you want to fight.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. When you want to come to blows about this verbally.
Then you should see me in the evenings when I'm stomping around my living room with my hands raised in the air. That's where I get a lot of that venom out, right?
I bet.
And here's what's interesting is I do believe people see it in me.
Yes.
I know they do because I have had others that have come to me after a meeting, after something has happened, and we've had long discussions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I I do believe that you got to stand firm. It's tiring, like I said before. It's exhausting. But as long as I have a welcome seat at that table, as long as I know that I'm going to lead with love, as long as I know I'm a child of God, yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
Then I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, because I think to myself too about the children in classrooms that I'll never know. I'll never know their names. Even you as a school board member, you will never know their names.
Right.
But in some way, you have an impact on their life.
Absolutely. And I think a part of this too that I know you recognize is that some of these people you're in the room with, they have no concept of where you're coming from. You know, I think sometimes we expect everybody to be on our level. Why can't they see it? You know, I mean, we do that sometimes in the church, come in and get baptized and then we'll talk, you know, you take people where they're at, you just don't leave them there. That's what Jesus did. And I think it would be wrong to assume that I'm sitting at the table and these people just purposely don't want to have my values because they're ignorant and dumb and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? There may be some that are just naturally opposed because they don't like what you stand for. But I think, you know, we have this assumption that they're the enemy when they're really the victim. And they don't know what they don't know. They don't know where I'm coming from. I don't know where they're coming from. And so I have a better chance if I try to understand that instead of just assuming that they're out to get me because of my values. You know?
Well, and let me tell you what, I have used this in my daily life. We have a set of standards in my workplace, a stand of workplace standards, you know, most organizations do.
Right.
And one of them is assume positive intent.
Yeah.
And well, I'm going to tell you what, I have run with that one because it's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
It's they're coming from a place of not having found their identity in Christ.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming positive intent on your part. I'm not going out here to convict you. That's not my job. Right? The word is what convicts, not me.
Exactly.
And I have to assume positive intent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's out to do harm to kids. I say it all the time. I do not believe somebody, well, we'll set those people aside that are out there.
There's a subset.
There's a subset.
Yeah.
But by and large, educators are not out to do harm to kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have their best interest at heart. They just come from a very different place.
Absolutely.
And what we believe to be a dangerous place.
Yeah.
You know, but I think all too often we just assume when we don't always consider that, you know, we were blessed to grow up in the households we grew up in, raised in the church, brought up in church, brought up with that compass from day one. It was there. And not everybody's like that. Some have no idea what that is like.
Yeah.
You know, I like to hunt, and somebody that may be from the Northeast, from New York City, would never understand that. Why would you go and kill an animal? You know, and all that. But I don't understand because I'm not coming from where they're from and they're not coming from where I'm from. You know, and so you have to acknowledge that we're from two very different places and then try to find that common ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it really is. And you know, I mean, the people that I interact with on a daily basis in whatever circle, it doesn't matter, whatever circle I am in, it's the same thing. My goal with you is to find something to connect with you around, to resonate around, because I will never be able to influence you if I don't have that connection. If we don't have that, you know, something that resonates between you and I. Yeah,
you could stand for the right things, but be a jerk. And you're not going to bring anybody to you in that way.
No.
You can be as right as rain, you know, but if you're a jerk, who cares? Yeah.
That's true. Absolutely.
Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
This
has been a great discussion. I want to tell our viewers and listeners that if you have a question, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Terry, we'll make sure she gets it, and I'm sure you'd be glad to answer. I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm sure that you'd be glad to answer that. And we just want you to share the word about the podcast. We're on Spotify, iTunes, all those different platforms. Continue to be with us. Terry, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the discussion.
You're welcome.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.